Good day, everyone. Welcome to another very insightful and invaluable session of CANTO Conversations. Today, I'm your host, Charles Douglas, Vice Chairman of CANTO and Senior Manager of Government and Regulatory Affairs for Cable and Wireless. And today we have a distinguished guest with us, Mr. Eamonn Sheehy, Senior Director, Public Sector at Cloud Carib. Our topic today is innovation, unity, and sustainability, the importance of gigabit infrastructure for managed service providers, or MSPs, in the Caribbean. I'd like to remind everyone that we'll have a question and answer session at the end of today's discussion. So please feel free to engage and submit your questions in the chat box throughout the discussion. We'll make an effort to get to all your questions or comments. Let me now introduce Mr. Sheehy more fully. Eamonn Sheehy is Cloud Carib's Senior Director for the Public Sector. His remit is to promote and provide advice in the use of regional public, hybrid, and private cloud services as a tool for information and communication technology resilience in the public sector. He has over 30 years experience in the public information technology matters. During his career, Eamonn has worked for the Irish Revenue Commissioners, the European Commissioner and World Customs Organization, WCO. He has also conducted a number of significant customs and trade facilitation studies in the CARIB region. Prior to joining Cloud Carib, she was a senior advisor to the Bahamas Ministry of Finance. His areas of coverage included customs modernization, automation of value-added tax and business license. He also acted as service authority on behalf of the Ministry of Finance during the development and rollout of the Bahamas government private cloud. It goes without saying, we have today a special guest, an expert in these matters, and a supporter of the Caribbean and CANTO. So, Eamonn, welcome to today's conversation. How are you doing?
Thank you very much, Charles. I'm doing very well, thank you. That was a very nice introduction.
Most deserving. For the benefit of our listeners, we're going to now start the conversation just with a use of a number of questions, thoughts, prompts, and it will be a discussion. We will not have a PowerPoint presentation today. So, Eamonn, tell us, why does this conversation even matter to us now about sustainability, unity, innovation, and gigabit infrastructure? Why does it matter?
Well, I think the Caribbean is at a crossroads, at a critical juncture right now on digital transformation. I think it's a topic we hear a lot about, particularly on the government side, and the implications for citizens about where data resides, how to access services, and how to innovate. And, you know, over the last maybe year or so, I've gone to a number of events where I've seen young entrepreneurs developing applications, innovating in the sphere of healthcare and other services, tourism, etc. And we can see there's a lot of things happening in the region, and we need to ensure that the infrastructure provided, because it affects the service we provide, the infrastructure provided matches the digital transformation speed that is going on at the moment. And what we need to avoid is a significant lag between delivering a gigabit environment with the developments that are going in software and digital transformation, etc.
So would it be fair to say that you are currently seeing a lag in the deployment of gigabit infrastructure?
Well, a lag, yeah, but yes, I guess we could say that. Certainly in some countries, there is gigabit available for business, But if we go beyond that aspect of it, we start to talk about citizens, because a lot of the digital transformation in public sector relates to citizen services. And we start talking about telemedicine and things like this. We need to have the infrastructure, as the saying would go, to the last mile at the gigabit level in order to roll out these kinds of services. So I think there is a need, because now we have governments talking about these kinds of services. How will these services be rolled out directly to citizens, and what will be the impact at the level of the citizen? And we need to have then the infrastructure that matches that expectation.
Well said. For the benefit of our listeners, what's the value of it being a gigabit infrastructure as opposed to what exists now, but it's not, you can't get gigabit speeds? Just talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so I mean, one could argue at the moment that things are pretty okay. Like, we're having this conversation right now. It's not on gigabit, but when we start then dealing with things like the Internet of Things, edge computing, let's say, for example, a silly example perhaps, but my watch here. If I was to pass out and fall on the floor, it could send a signal to my GP or to the hospital or to my neighbor to say, I've had a seizure, I've passed out on the floor. In that instance, you need an instantaneous communication that is always available. And then you have, like, let's say, I come from Ireland. My mother is in her mid-80s. She has a device on her that's connected to the internet. So if she has an accident anywhere in the house or the garden, she can just push a button on her wrist and it's transmitted. The information is transmitted. Somebody can speak to her directly. These are the kind of things and services that we need to have gigabit all the way to a household. And there may be other solutions that we require. Let's say education, for example. Right now, we have a situation where I think across the Caribbean, on average, we might have 30 students to a classroom. You've got one teacher teaching everybody. Not all students are operating at the same speed and the same level. When they go home, can they get, personalized tuition through the internet with a mixed media for, it could be video, voice, whatever it is that's required. It could even be some AI type solutions that require interactivity. So when you start to add in all of these things, you realize the way to deliver these is through a gigabit infrastructure.
Thank you for that. With respect to the technology and the transport, would you say this includes what? Fiber, LEOs, meaning satellites? Is this all in that space for providing a gigabit infrastructure, or are you just talking about fiber?
It has to be, I think, a multifaceted approach. And I'll give you, again, another example that we can think about. We're in a natural disaster zone right across the Caribbean. And if you think about, managing the impact of disasters, predicting what's going to happen, you might have sensors in specific locations about rising tide. You would also have maybe satellite imagery that's coming through on the impact of an immediate disaster, how that gets fed back to, for example, a centralized cloud service that's connected to a sovereign AI environment that's doing predictive analysis, providing decision-making for SEDIMA, for example, and people who are working in these environments. Then I think you need a multifaceted approach. If a drone is up in the air, it's not connected to a fiber, it's connected wirelessly to a particular endpoint or a satellite communication. So I think from our perspective as a managed service provider, we would consider a gigabit infrastructure as a multifaceted infrastructure with various communication options.
Very insightful, and we'll come back to talking about that later, right? About how we as a Caribbean organize ourselves to achieve that. Okay, so tell us a little bit about what a managed service provider does, such as Cloud Carib. What's your role and how it would assist your organization to deliver for the Caribbean, and including citizens and the public sector, wherever you want to put that focus.
Okay.
Because not all of us may readily understand what you mean by a managed. So you're not a telecommunications
No.
operator. So tell us.
Yeah. So we sit, let's say, above a telecommunications operator. Telecommunications operators are critical to our business model. So we basically are a multi-jurisdictional cloud infrastructure service in the Caribbean. But beyond that, then we can help design and build out zero trust networks for organizations for cybersecurity reasons. We provide cybersecurity services. We provide disaster recovery and business continuity services, and they can be operated from within our multi-jurisdictional cloud infrastructure, which is focused on the Caribbean and Latin America. So, for example, we don't have any infrastructure in the United States of America. We have infrastructure in the Bahamas, Barbados, Jamaica, Panama, Ecuador, soon to have it in Trinidad, Guyana, Belize. So we're building out an environment that focuses critically on this region and providing the same levels and increased levels of service that you might get from one of our competitors in the north, like an Amazon or a Google service provider. So our managed services allow you, whether a government or commercial entity, to deploy your applications and your data in our environment, and you will get a consistent service level agreement managed environment, so you can focus on the business, focus on dealing with your clients, and not have to focus on all of the infrastructure back end and all of the disaster recovery and cybersecurity matters that you would normally have to deal with.
Okay, interesting. It sounds like data centers play a critical role to your capabilities. And what are the challenges you see there as you talk about, gigabit infrastructure? Is there a need for more data centers? Are you happy with what's there, the standards? Tell us a little bit about that.
I think, yeah. So I think the thing is that if you were to look at particularly the uptime certification, there are not so many data centers in the Caribbean region that are actually certified, which of course does not mean that they don't operate at a certain standard, but they're not certified. And actually last week I was in Curacao on some panels talking about regional cooperation and coordination at the Caribbean Data Center Association's event. And what we realized is that we have to operate on a regional level. Not every single jurisdiction can afford to have, like Blue Nap, a tier 4 data center. But can we have tier 3? Can we even have tier 2? Can we operate on regional data centers in a certain level, a certain number of countries that can house that level of infrastructure and fund that level of infrastructure? And then, of course, then we need the telecommunications operators, and then we need the managed service providers. So there are layers of operation, and there are layers of expertise. So we use data centers. Whatever data center is available in the country that we are operating in, we will go in and we will look at what's available, and we will choose the best available option that we have in that country. And similarly, when we go to telecommunications, we try to use, if it's 2 telecommunications operators in the country, we will use both of those for our managed services. So we don't rely on 1, we rely on 2. If there's 3, we will rely on 3. So we have to kind of de-risk, and we have to be resilient in our operations. And it's the same whether it's a data center, telecoms operator. We rely on both of those critical services to manage our business. Without them, we can't operate. For us, it would be better if there were more certified data centers, because then we know, just like the services we provide, that these entities are certified by an external entity. And that makes our life easier to say, okay, fine, tier 3 certified, we know we can operate here.
Well said, well said. Are there many managed service providers in the region? Is there a lot of competition in your space, or this is a sort of a space that Cloud Carib is carving out? How would you describe the demand for the managed services?
There are certainly some managed service providers within individual countries. But we are the only multi-jurisdictional managed service provider in this region. Most people when they think about cloud, they invariably think about Amazon, Google, Azure. And that's still the case today in many respects. You know, the old adage, if I give away my age, from the 1970s and 80s, nobody got fired for buying IBM. Well, nobody gets fired for using Azure, Google, or AWS. So we have this battle. We have a battle that we believe that we are starting to win, because the service levels we provide go beyond the service levels that the big ones provide. Yes, you can go and use their compute and their storage, but we wrap everything around our cybersecurity, our disaster recovery, our business continuity services that are baked into our offering for our clients. And we have invested in the region. We've invested not only in infrastructure in the region, but we've invested in staff, invested in educating and providing the staff levels that we require within the region. And that's part of our, let's say, motto, is to build the expertise in the region and to build out our infrastructure in the region to focus on this region.
No, very, very good. Very well said. And very interesting. Very interesting. I'm sure we may get a few comments, questions on this. So as we make the case, because again, going back to our theme, innovation, unity, sustainability, the importance of a gigabit infrastructure for MSPs in the Caribbean. Once this infrastructure gets in place, so we have some of the services, we're building momentum. You're saying, no, we should accelerate the deployment of the infrastructure. What do you expect? What difference will it make for the Caribbean? How will the Caribbean be stimulated? Make that case to say, yep, why this is necessary. What innovation, what will change?
So, I mean, okay, there's I guess maybe a difference between what will change, what could change, and what will change. So could and will.
Go through both of them, no worries.
So from our point of view in Cloud Carib, something we have actually been pushing for quite a number of years is to change the dynamic of the statement CARICOM single ICT space. If you think about having regional certified data centers, or national certified data centers, gigabit communications, internet exchange points in every country, which we consider to be a critical part of a gigabit environment. The ability then to leverage cloud infrastructure. So you can, and it doesn't matter where that cloud infrastructure resides. It could reside in Jamaica, but it could also reside in Barbados. And you want to spin up an application very quickly in the real context of what cloud computing means, which is this elasticity and dynamism in procuring resources. And you don't have to worry about where these resources are, because now you're operating off a regional cloud ecosystem with a gigabit infrastructure managed in data centers that are certified. Then you have a really innovative platform, because most people that I would talk to that are innovators, their problem is accessing resources in a cost-effective manner. So when you deal on a regional level with a common cloud infrastructure, you have a common cybersecurity infrastructure, you have a common disaster recovery environment, the total cost of ownership starts to drop dramatically. And that increases the ability for people to actually step into the innovation game and to use these services. We can move things in the event of a hurricane from one location to another location seamlessly. And we actually did some testing of this already some years ago with TSTT as part of CTU's 30th anniversary, to demonstrate with an interoperable cloud environment how you could shift data and an application from one cloud service provider to another cloud service provider and back again seamlessly. But now when we're talking about gigabit, because of the volumes of data that will be required to move maybe at short notice, then I think we really have a significant ecosystem that actually puts rubber to the road on single ICT space.
Two things you mentioned have perked my interest, right? Let me ask the first. The first one was about internet exchange points, something that we can readily relate to across the Caribbean. And we have different levels of internet exchange points and different frameworks around them. So that's something that we can relate to, right? Um, what role do they play? And just to make sure that if we have opportunity to revisit ours, we can, in a more informed way, how should they be structured? Is it that the telcos need to pair within the exchange point, or they could just have a link to the exchange point? Just something is of interest. Let me
Yeah,
hear your thoughts on that.
yeah, let's say I'll hold my hand up and say I'm not a telecommunications expert on how the structure should be, but yes, the interconnectivity, however it is done between the telecoms providers, is critical. I mean, I wouldn't be able to say they should be in the IXP but they should be connected to the IXP in some way, because you just need local data to be able to be accessible locally and to be transmitted within the jurisdiction. And similarly, the internet exchange points should be interconnected, so regional data is transmitted within the region. I mean, right now we have the situation where data hops up to the US and comes back down again, and there's all this latency that's involved in that process. And again, if we go back to talking about scenarios where we need critical data to be done with low latency, obviously IXPs play an important role because they keep that local data and they move that local data locally. So whoever is the telecoms provider, however they need to be technically connected to it, they need to be connected to it. Otherwise, you're only doing half the job.
Very clear. Do you see right now much of the work in the cloud and the arrangements are being driven by private sector interest, if I will, and just the demand for innovation and efficiency and managing costs? As far as I'm aware, they don't really fall into a regulated framework. You could correct me if I'm wrong, right? I don't think so, but I'm happy to be corrected. As you see this developing and growing, and as you speak about the regionalization and a common cloud platform and so on, is this something that needs to be coordinated and regulated by governments? Or do you think that allowing this private enterprise through its initiatives, as is the case now, is the formula?
I think it's maybe a little bit of both, I would say. To deal with the first point first about the commercial enterprises and not regulated entities. That's perfectly correct. But let's say where we would step into that environment is when you have data privacy legislation and commercial companies are collecting personal identifiable information. They are regulated to the point that they have to meet the standards of the data privacy laws. And that's this whole thing about data controllers. So you're collecting PII data for a specific business purpose. You become a data controller. Then you have a data processor who is the entity that processes the data and manages the data, like a cloud Carib. The data controller must verify that the data processor meets the standards for keeping that PII data secure. So at that level, you are kind of regulated. And then the issue is, how do you ensure that is the case? And it's the same for government. How do you ensure that is the case? One of the insurance is that entities like Cloud Carib are certified in particular standards, like the ISO 27001 or the SOC 2 Type 2 and the CSA Star for cloud service providers. There are certain international standards and industry standards where we are independently audited on how we manage our internal processes, how we secure critical data and sensitive data. So from that regard, then commercial operators should be looking at their data processors on what certifications they have. How is their data going to be managed? From a cloud service point of view, if entities are doing their own thing, they want to manage all of their systems in-house, then theoretically they would need to get these certifications themselves. And these can be quite arduous and expensive processes to do. It's our business to do it because that's our business model. And that's why we go to companies and say, well, guys, you know, can you afford to do this? Is this part of your core business? If it is not, then why don't you partner with us and let us take care of all of this kind of stuff for you, because we are audited and we have the cybersecurity expertise, et cetera, et cetera. So they're not regulated, but within data privacy legislation, there is a certain level of regulation. And I know in Jamaica in particular, because Jamaica right now, I believe, is the leader in data privacy implementation in the region. I've seen already advertisements for enterprises that you have to register as a data controller and you have to indicate what sensitive data you are managing on behalf of your clients. So there is certain levels of regulation that need to be handled. Sorry, and then I'll just follow up with the second point on the.
No, please go ahead, man. Feel free.
On the regional level, then let's say an entity like a CTU, they should be providing, I think, it's a standards that are required for interoperability, and also maybe standards for cloud service providers that are going to host critical data. They can say you need to have, you know, a certain level of certification standards in order to be recognized as an entity that can host sensitive information. And I can give you another example. In Trinidad and Tobago, recently they've had a tax incentive for cybersecurity for commercial companies. You could get up to $75,000 kind of as a tax incentive if you invest in cybersecurity. But to invest in that cybersecurity, the companies you're speaking to had to have at least one certification standard, whether it was ISO 27001, whether it was CSA Star 2, or whether it was SOC 2. These were listed as the standards the companies, the cybersecurity companies, must have in order for you to get this rebate from government. So it's these kinds of standards that could be set at a high level that ensures the quality of the service that will be provided.
Deep stuff. And it's going to morph us into the other conversation I wanted to go into about the need for Caribbean players to come together. Because, you know, again, just for the benefit of somebody who may have just joined, the theme of our discussion is innovation, unity, and sustainability, the importance of gigabit infrastructure for MSPs in the Caribbean. And I want to focus a little on that unity piece, right? We talk about sustainability often. I think we've covered like innovation. We've done that well. Talk about the unity, about what is required, right? Because you've already set the stage that this has to be done holistically by the Caribbean players partnering and collaborating. So here is the thought. One, you've mentioned the single ICT space, which CARICOM has been trying to make a full reality for some time. And the hope is that the momentum will be increased now and that this is nearer than further.
Yeah.
The other idea is, so the CTU doesn't really, in the current structure, doesn't really have the authority and the sort of autonomy and the legislative framework to give, you know, impose mandatory or standards that people have to abide by. And so you have the individual telecommunications authorities or commissions within the different markets, within the different countries, who will make rules or frameworks for their country. And the idea is to get harmonization among them all. And then, or maybe there's a current conversation of having some sort of common group established that sits in CARICOM that provides guidance to these various, you know, NTRCs or, you know, regulatory bodies. So you can see the challenge already, right? You see the challenge or the framework. What are your thoughts on that? How do we get around it? First of all, just highlight for our audience the importance of unity, why it's critical, and then Given the current dynamic, what are your thoughts or suggestions on it?
So it's critical from the point of view of economies of scale. That's I think one of the critical aspects of implementing managed services environments in the region. It provides economies of scale. It allows people to operate in a more structured way from a cybersecurity point of view, as opposed to individual entities more or less having cybersecurity. You set common standards. So I think from that point of view, having a regional approach provides that level of economy of scale. That's the primary thing. If I want to create an application, I can put it into Cloud Carib's cloud, and I don't have to be concerned necessarily where that cloud, where my application is stored. Is it partly in Barbados? Is it partly in Jamaica? Is it partly? It doesn't really matter, as long as the standards are there and can be delivered. So I think that certainly is the most critical part. And then on cost, when you have economies of scale, you've got cloud infrastructure across the region, you're sharing cost. So you're sharing cybersecurity cost, you're sharing cybersecurity expertise. It means that if you were to come to Cloud Carib, for example, you wouldn't necessarily have to have your own cybersecurity expert. We provide cybersecurity expertise from within the company, and all our clients get the same level. So I think that is a critical part of economies of scale, I would say. Sorry, the other part of the question was, sorry, just to...
No, I'm from where you sit, outside looking in, I would say, right? You've done a lot of work for the Caribbean. You've been, worked in the Bahamas. You've done sustainable reports for CARICOM and so on. So, we're going to adapt you, right? Man, you're part of the Caribbean family, right? But given the dynamics of the regulatory structure, what are your thoughts on what we need to do to create that unity? And are there any other jurisdictions with similar challenges and how they may have overcome it? Or any thoughts on that, right? What's being done in the EU? Anything that you want to share without being boxed in. I don't want to box you in to any one of these issues, but if you would love to share your thoughts on them or encourage what could be done so that many policymakers on the call, many leaders in industry will listen to the podcast. So the question then is, what are your suggestions for us?
Well, I think a lot of stuff has already been done. I mean, a lot of the standards are being adhered to in the region, and I think it's really. I guess the region is relatively small from the point of view of the market size. So how many players you could have in the region, and we already have the CTU setting standards and things like this. That's very important. Building out the ecosystems is also important for trust. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure what more I could say on this other than implementing standards and setting standards is critical, and then everybody adhering to those standards. I mean, that's just a critical part for us, and we try to implement our best practices, our best standards that we can.
Fair enough. And what role would you want CANTO to continue to play?
Sorry,
facilitating this what role would you want CANTO to continue to play? Facilitating this CANTO conversations, of course, is a start. We did publish your article in the CANTO as well, late last year. So what's your appeal to CANTO as an organization?
Well, I mean, I think setting the standards is really critical. Having entities like us talk about what we are doing, and let's say.
So maybe, Eamonn, if we tapped you from our regulatory committees, for example, that discuss issues such as this, maybe we could get some standard setting papers out of our regulatory committee, with various inputs. Maybe something like that could be then available to share with governments
Yes,
and others.
I think certainly that's something that we would feed into, and we try to do that kind of thing ourselves, regardless anyway, as part of our kind of outreach policy to provide, let's say, best practices and provide knowledge on how we operate as a company and the services that we provide across the region, for sure. Yes, that would be something that we could definitely work with you on.
Excellent. All right, so let's focus a little bit on now the resilience piece of our topic. This gigabit infrastructure, which you outlined that is so urgent for us, is it, how do we make it sustainable? Is it resilient, given all the challenges that we have with, issues of climate and just general sustainability? What are your thoughts on that? Does it help or does it hurt?
That is a good question. Sorry, could you just repeat that question again? Because I was thinking about something.
So the question is, given our challenges with climate change, a lot of issues with hurricanes and so on, sustainability is very important to the Caribbean. So whatever next wave of infrastructure that we'll be building out, investing in this case, gigabit infrastructure, the question is can we do it in a sustainable way and a resilient way? Given our challenges with energy, energy is very high, generally in some of the markets in the region, and whatever other thoughts that you may have. Energy efficiency is very important to us, high dependence on oil, and, the price does fluctuate. It does have a high cost to a number of Caribbean territories. Is this going to cost us, raise our energy bill tremendously, and the byproducts of fossil fuel? Tell me.
That's a difficult one to talk about. I think we would have to operate smartly. I think we have to operate in a better way. I'm not sure.
What I could say, though, given what you've already said, I could see the importance of not everybody trying to replicate the same infrastructure, right? That you have that consolidation and cost efficiency, where I don't try to build a data center if I can necessarily share another data center facility, even if it's in Curacao or wherever, that we don't replicate infrastructure that is unnecessary. I think we could agree with that.
Yes.
And of course, whatever efficiency come from, smart grids or smart cities, anything that flow from having improved capacity and speeds and improved latency, I'm sure would also assist. But we'll see when we get to our question and answer session. Maybe some of our listeners will be able to come in and share in a wider conversation about this. And that's fine, because we don't have all the answers. And I'm very, very respectful of the fact that you didn't just say, yes, the world will be better, all be fine, and it's all green. You actually paused to reflect on it, because there are other implications, and I respect that a whole lot. I do respect that. All right, let's just wrap up on, before we open for questions, on the business case for investment in gigabit infrastructure. You know that a number of the telcos within the region have cooperated or coordinated to form what is called CANTO C9, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which has been having a look at the current infrastructure investment, the infrastructure gap that exists if we are to really get to a gigabit society, ubiquitous across the Caribbean, and saying some of the revenue streams right now are flat to low, and they don't really justify that investment and the return that would be anticipated. And so, you know, we have what we call this fair share lobby to say a number of the large traffic generators that exist, right? You know, the Googles, the Amazon, the Netflix, and others, right? The Metas and so on, should participate in paying differing some of the cost for the investment so that more investment could be made and it could be more sustainable. So from where we sit, I don't know that there's a clear case for the investment or the business case is made already. What's your thought on this without getting drawn into any sort of
the politics
conflict, right? Politics of it. But you understand the question. You understand, right? So we can put the infrastructure in, we can put the fiber in, to the extent that telcos on the ground are investing in that, but then there is competition from LEOs, which you say is part of the Gigabit infrastructure, which will come on top of that. So you have that competition on that supply side. Tell me how you see this happening, or what's your thought on the business case?
That's a...
But somebody has to pay for it, Eamonn. Somebody's got to pay for it.
I agree. Somebody has to pay for it. I mean, and I know this is an ongoing discussion about who should pay for it. Yeah, okay. I guess the maybe the comment is the region is quite small, and it's very difficult to how can I say operate like the big players in the global market can operate. So there has to be some kind of quid pro quo here on some of these things. How that will be done, that's another. I mean, that's another question. I'm not sure if I can answer the question. Who should pay?
But here's how I'll back you up, right? It needs to happen.
Yeah.
I think we're all aligned on that. It needs to happen. If not, the Caribbean is going to get left behind, right? So let's say we just keep our minds open and ideas open. We continue having the discussion, talking through it, and making adjustments as we need to in order to solve. But I agree with you. I don't have the answers either. I don't have all the answers, but I can say it's an issue, and it's hardly likely that this will be built if there's no business case, or not at the rate that we need it to be built.
Yeah.
Because individual companies are making investments, and you did highlight that a number of companies do offer gigabit speeds right now to private sector and the banks and so on. Enterprise, but what we're talking about is something ubiquitous across the entire society where residents, citizens can benefit, and not just private enterprise. So I'll take you off the hook there, Eamonn. Been a wonderful guest. And at this point, I think it would be reasonable to just open up the conversation, try to see if we can field some of the questions that have been put in the chat, and benefit also from comments, thoughts from our listeners, right? So let me see if I find the first question. This is from Sydney Weaver. I think in St. Martin. Question for Mr. Sheehy, based on what you stated regarding having a gigabit infrastructure from point to point, including the last mile, in order for cloud services within the Caribbean to make sense. Based on your statement, can one deduct that there is a business case for 5G within the Caribbean?
Well, the short answer is yes. I think there is a business case for 5G within the region. No doubt about it. Particularly, we have a lot more services that are, let's say, mobile orientated, and I think we need to have that level of interactivity, speed, being more ubiquitous, regardless of what device or where you are located. I think that is certainly critical from a developmental point of view. I mean, in this region, we rely heavily on tourism and tourism products, and people are out and about doing various things. So yes, 5G access would be critical for layering services on top of that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good answer. What are some practical ways? Other question from, I think, Madam Secretary General. What are some practical ways MSPs, governments, and telecom operators in the Caribbean can collaborate to accelerate gigabit deployment across borders?
Well, I'm not a telecoms expert, so answering that question is a bit, maybe a little bit difficult for me. I'm a user of these environments, but I think economies of scale always. So let's say whatever is being rolled out, if it can be rolled out as a package across the region, there may be economies of scale there that would reduce the cost of ownership and speed up the implementation. I think that would be something that I would come up with immediately, operating as a region, across a region, as opposed to individual companies and individual countries.
Right. And I do believe we have opportunities there for sure. And there may be some initiatives that have already been started. Because you will note, Eamonn, that some of our companies are pan-regional.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, they may be trying across the region, maybe to have their own digital cloud services though, or they may be partnering with others. So it may not be as challenging as it might appear at first.
Yeah.
You
And I
wanted to
think,
comment here?
yeah, I mean, just talking about the kind of services, I mean, we are, as a company, we're an example of a multi-jurisdictional cloud provider. So we have infrastructure in various countries. But also, like thinking back a few years ago, we did something for CTU's 30th anniversary, where we interacted with TSTT, and we were able to port application and data seamlessly between our environment and their environment. So interoperability is a big issue, and that interoperability allows for more competition, and it allows for also resilience from the point of view of moving things around the region at certain points during hurricane season, et cetera, et cetera. So I think interoperability is an issue that can be very beneficial to the region. Standards and interoperability.
Sounds really good. I'm not seeing any additional questions, so I'm okay. Yes, there is a question from Director Oswola. Let me ask it. Premised on your experience, could you share examples of incentives that have arisen as a result of regulatory/government collaboration with mobile network operators to progress the rollout of network infrastructure? I can read it again if you want, Eamonn.
Yeah,
you want me to read it again?
Yeah.
Sure. Premised on your experience, could you share examples of incentives that have arisen as a result of regulatory or government collaboration with mobile network operators to progress the rollout of network infrastructure?
That one, I'm afraid, would be a little bit beyond me from the point of view, because I'm not aware of it. I mean, for us as a company, because that's our focus, what I am aware of is, let's say, what they've done in Trinidad and Tobago, tax incentives to beef up cybersecurity and to engage companies like ours because we have certification standards and stuff like this. So, but from the point of view of incentives to roll out, that would be a little bit beyond my area of expertise, I have to say.
Thank you for your modesty on that. We understand. We understand. I think so. Yep, I think those were all the questions. I would love to thank you, Eamonn. You've been really a truly enlightening and modest guest with a lot of expertise. And you did take our questions and you did share quite a bit. There's much to reflect on to see how we can move it forward, because we all agree that there's not much of an option if we are going to be, as a region, be sustained into the future. We have to plug into the wider ecosystem in the world, And that's going to require gigabit infrastructure. It's
Yeah.
going to require gigabit infrastructure.
Yeah. I think maybe one thing, I don't think I mentioned it, but you know, there is this, if you're talking about building out a sector and why gigabit infrastructure is needed, like let's say the global value of digital nomads is like an $800 billion
Wow.
value globally. So you can imagine getting 1% of that in the region. And like we had the welcome stamp and we have various other incentives during COVID. So you can imagine if we had a gigabit infrastructure and we had standards in place and we could attract these people, you know, who've, you know, average incomes of $100,000+ US each, and you could get a small slice of that industry, what the impact could be on this region. That's
unbelievable.
It's a major potential market that has not been, and who wouldn't want to come to the Caribbean and work on their computer by the beach or by the pool, you know? Who wouldn't
Especially during winter, right?
Exactly. Who wouldn't want to do that, you know? So there is a massive market there. If we were able to get the infrastructure and get the standards and everything into place, we have another layer on top of the standard tourism market to sell to a very big market that's out there globally at the moment.
Awesome, and that fits nicely here with the audience that are on. We can relate to that. Very powerful. So thank you very much, Eamonn. Don't leave us yet, but thank you so much. At this point, I would just like to go into some closing comments on behalf of CANTO. Let me just make sure there are no additional questions in the chat. There are none. So first of all, let me just repeat. So look, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for the engaging questions that we had. They were deep. And Eamonn, most of all, you made it possible. Thank you for support to CANTO. Thank you for being on CANTO Conversations. And of course, in the chat, we've put a reference to your previous article that others can read or reread when they have the opportunity. But here are a couple of announcements I'd like to make. So starting, our next CANTO Conversations is scheduled for May 15th at 12 p.m. AST, where we'll be joined by Jacob Ferguson and Andrew Yance of Calix. The topic will be Beyond the Connection, delivering exceptional experiences for residents, small business, and visitors. The registration link is posted in the chat, and you can find further details on our social media platforms. Next, mark your calendars for CANTO's upcoming 40th annual conference and exhibition, which takes place from July 13th through 16th, 2025. It will be at the Grand Hyatt Baha Mar in Nassau, the Bahamas. This event promises to be a dynamic gathering of industry leaders, experts, and innovators. So in concluding, again, thank you all for being part of today's CANTO Conversations. We look forward to seeing you at CANTO 2025 in July and at the next CANTO Conversations on May 15th. Eamonn, it was my pleasure to share the spotlight with you. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and stay connected. Bye for now.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All right, bye, Eamonn.